I was my brother's steel, his fists against the world. But when that world came crashing down, his art became the shield neither of us expected. There are two things you need to know about my family. First, my parents believed in discipline and self-reliance above all else. Second, they raised two completely different children. I'm Maya. From the age of 6, my life was a cycle of school, homework, and the dojo. My dad, a man who saw the world as a place you had to be prepared for, enrolled me in karate. That evolved into jiu-jitsu, then Muay Thai, and eventually a blend of everything that felt more like a practical way of life than a sport. I wasn't a prodigy, but I was dedicated. The dojo was my sanctuary, a place where control and focus were the only things that mattered. It taught me how to be calm in the face of chaos. Then there's my little brother, Leo. He's 5 years younger than me, and where I am steel, he is art. He lives inside his sketchbooks, creating entire worlds with just a pencil and his imagination. He can tell you the entire history of a fictional universe he's been building since he was 8, but he couldn't throw a proper punch if his life depended on it. He's gentle, kind to a fault, and sees the good in everyone, even when they don't deserve it. I love him more than anything in this world. He's the reason I kept training long after all the other kids my age quit. In the back of my mind, I always knew that a world that wasn't always kind would eventually find someone like him. I just hoped I'd be there when it did. The trouble started subtly. A ripped sleeve on his favorite hoodie, which he claimed got caught on a fence. A lost lunch, which he brushed off by saying he wasn't hungry anyway. He started taking the long way home from school, adding an extra 20 minutes to his walk. When I asked him why, he'd just mumble something about wanting to see the dog in the corner house or finding a new shortcut that wasn't actually short at all. He became quieter at dinner, his eyes glued to his plate, the vibrant light that usually danced in them dimmed to a low flicker. I knew. I'm not an idiot. I could see the invisible bruises forming on his spirit. I tried talking to him, of course. I'd sit on the edge of his bed at night, the smell of graphite and paper hanging in the air, and I'd ask him if everything was okay at school. He'd just nod, give me a weak, watery smile, and say, "Yeah, Maya, everything's fine, just tired." He didn't want to worry me. He didn't want to be a burden. That's just who Leo is. He would rather suffer in silence than cause a ripple in anyone else's water. But my water was already a storm. Every forced smile, every flimsy excuse, was another gust of wind on the waves of rage building inside me. I was just waiting for the proof I knew I didn't want to find. That day came on a Tuesday. I got out of class early and decided to surprise him by meeting him on his walk home. I took his usual shortcut, a winding path that snaked behind the old community baseball field. It was quiet back there, shielded from the main road by a thick line of overgrown maple trees. And that's where I heard it. Laughter. Not the happy, carefree kind. This was sharp and cruel, like shards of broken glass. I slowed my pace, my sneakers silent on the dirt path. I peered through a gap in the autumn leaves, and my blood ran cold. There were 3 of them, all bigger than Leo, probably a year or 2 older. They had him backed up against the chain-link fence. The ringleader, a tall kid with a smug, punchable face named Kyle, was holding Leo's most prized possession, his sketchbook, the one with the leather cover that I'd saved up for 3 months to buy him for his birthday. "What's this garbage, Leo?" Kyle sneered, flipping through the pages dramatically. His 2 cronies laughed on cue, like a trained pack of hyenas. "Little dragons, spaceships, you're such a baby." Leo's face was pale, his shoulders hunched in on himself. He was trying to be small, to disappear. "Please, Kyle," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Just give it back." "Give it back?" Kyle scoffed. He held the book up, just out of Leo's desperate reach. "I think I'm doing you a favor. This stuff is embarrassing. No wonder you don't have any friends." He paused, looking at a detailed drawing of a knight in elaborate armor. He smirked, a truly ugly expression, and with a deliberate, slow movement he started to tear the page. The sound of that tearing paper sliced through the air and struck something deep inside me. It was the sound of a line being crossed, the sound of my brother's heart breaking. I felt that calm I had spent years mastering settle over me, cold and heavy and absolute. I watched Kyle's fingers pinch the corner of the next page. My feet were moving before I even made a conscious decision to act. I stepped out from behind the trees, the afternoon sun casting a long shadow in front of me. "Hey," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their laughter like a razor. All three of them turned. Kyle looked me up and down, his smirk faltering for just a second before returning with renewed arrogance. He didn't know who I was. To him, I was just some girl. "Get lost," he sneered, turning his attention back to the sketchbook. "This doesn't concern you." I took another slow step forward, my eyes locked on his hands, on the precious pages he held. I could see the terror and confusion in Leo's eyes, but I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "Stay put. I've got this." I looked back at Kyle, my voice dropping to a low, even tone that held no room for argument. "You're wrong," I said, a dangerous calm settling into my bones. "You see, that's my little brother. And you just made this my concern." Kyle actually laughed. It was a short, barking sound, full of disbelief. He glanced at his two goons who smirked back at him, their confidence bolstered by their numbers. "His sister?" Kyle repeated, looking me over again, this time with a dismissive sneer. "Ooh, I'm shaking. What are you going to do, huh? Hit me with your purse?" One of his friends, a shorter kid with a stupid beanie pulled down over his ears, chimed in. "Yeah, go home and play with your dolls, sweetheart." My eyes never left Kyle's. My entire world had narrowed to the space between us, to the ruined sketchbook he still clutched in his hand. Leo was a small, terrified shape in my peripheral vision. I could feel his fear like a static charge in the air, and it only fueled the icy resolve hardening in my veins. "I'm not going to ask you again," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Let go of the book, now." "Make me," he challenged, a smug grin spreading across his face. He deliberately crumpled the corner of the cover, his eyes locked on mine, daring me. To seal his point, he took a step forward and gave my shoulder a hard shove. It was a classic bully move, an assertion of physical dominance meant to intimidate, to make me stumble back and accept my place. It was the last mistake he'd make that day. The shove was exactly the opening I needed. Instead of resisting the force, I let it guide me. I flowed with it, pivoting on the ball of my back foot. As his hand was still extended, I brought my own hand up, not to block, but to catch his wrist. My fingers wrapped around the delicate bones, my thumb pressing down on the nerve cluster on the back of his hand. In the same fluid motion, I twisted my body, using his own forward momentum to pull him off balance. A surprised yelp escaped his lips as a sharp, electric pain shot up his arm. His fingers went numb and instinctively opened. The sketchbook dropped from his grasp, landing softly on a patch of grass. I didn't stop there. I continued the rotation, stepping in close and bending his arm back in a simple, inescapable lock. He was forced to bend forward at the waist, his face contorted in a mask of shock and pain. He was completely under my control. "What the?" Beanie Kid shouted, his eyes wide. The other one, a lanky kid who hadn't spoken, just stood there, his jaw slack. For a split second, there was a stunned silence, broken only by Kyle's pained grunt. Then, as if a switch was flipped, Beanie Kid's shock turned to rage. With a clumsy roar, he charged at me from the side, his arms wide as if he was going to tackle me. It was clumsy, predictable. I didn't even have to let go of Kyle. I simply shifted my weight, raised my right leg, and snapped a sharp side kick into his thigh, a Charlie horse delivered with surgical precision. His leg buckled instantly. He went down with a loud oof, clutching his thigh and rolling on the ground in agony. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was debilitating. He wasn't getting up any time soon. I released Kyle with a slight push, and he stumbled back, clutching his wrist and staring at me with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He looked at Beanie Kid whimpering on the ground, then at the lanky one who was now slowly, deliberately backing away. The pack mentality was broken. The hyenas were scattering. Leo finally seemed to find his voice. "Maya," he breathed, his eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Awe? Fear? He took a tentative step and quickly scooped his sketchbook off the ground, clutching it to his chest like a shield. I ignored him, my focus entirely on Kyle. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by a raw, humiliated fury. This wasn't about a sketchbook anymore. This was about his pride, about being so effortlessly dismantled by a girl in front of his friends. His face turned a blotchy red, and his breathing came in ragged, angry gasps. "You're done here," I said, my voice still even, still calm. "Take your friend and go. Don't ever let me see you near my brother again." For a moment I thought he was going to listen. I thought the fear would win. But then I saw something shift in his eyes. The fear was being consumed by a desperate, cornered animal rage. He wasn't thinking about consequences. He was only thinking about hurting me back. His eyes darted around, looking for a weapon, an advantage, anything. He saw nothing but dirt and trees. His gaze snapped back to me, filled with a venom that chilled me to the bone. "You'll pay for this," he snarled, his voice a low, guttural promise. And then his hand dove into the front pocket of his jeans, his knuckles white as he fumbled for something inside. My body tensed. Every instinct, every hour of training I'd ever endured screamed at me. A pocket. A desperate move. It could be anything. A rock, keys held between the knuckles, or worst-case scenario, a knife. The world seemed to slow down, the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves fading into a dull, distant hum. All that mattered was the space between us and the shape his hand was making inside his jeans. Leo saw it too. A sharp gasp escaped his lips. "Maya, look out!" Kyle's hand came out of his pocket, and for a heart-stopping second, I saw the glint of metal. My mind raced, cataloging threats and responses in a split-second flash. It wasn't a knife. It was a pair of brass knuckles, dull and heavy, slipping over his fingers. It was clumsy, but it was enough to turn a punch into a potentially lethal blow. He didn't hesitate. Fueled by pure, humiliated rage, he lunged. He swung wildly, a huge, arcing haymaker aimed right at my head. It was a telegraphed, sloppy punch born of anger, not skill. That made it predictable, but the raw power and the heavy metal on his fist made it incredibly dangerous. I didn't back away. Backing away from a wild swing like that is how you get caught off balance. Instead, I did the opposite. I stepped in. I moved inside the arc of his swing, the brass knuckles whistling through the air just inches from my ear. The movement brought me chest to chest with him. He was momentarily overextended, his arm still moving past me, his balance compromised. In that brief window, I struck. I didn't punch. My goal wasn't to brawl. It was to neutralize the threat. I drove the heel of my palm upward, a sharp, jarring strike directly under his chin. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was designed to do one thing: snap his head back and rattle his brain against his skull, just enough to disorient him. His eyes went wide with a dazed shock, his grunt of effort turning into a choked gasp. For a split second, he was a puppet with his strings cut. His body went momentarily limp. That was all the time I needed. I hooked my leg behind his, sweeping his feet out from under him, while simultaneously pushing his upper body backward. He went down hard, the air exploding from his lungs as his back hit the compacted dirt of the path. The brass knuckles flew from his grasp, skittering across the ground and coming to rest near a tree root. He lay there, gasping for breath, the fight completely knocked out of him. The lanky kid who had been frozen in place finally broke and ran. He didn't even look back. He just scrambled away through the trees like a startled deer. Beanie Kid was still on the ground, but he had managed to push himself up into a sitting position, his face a pale mask of pain and fear. He looked at Kyle on the ground, then at me, standing over him, and a look of pure terror washed over him. He started crawling backward, dragging his injured leg behind him. I let them go. I stood there, my breathing steady, the adrenaline humming under my skin, but my mind perfectly clear. The immediate danger was over. I looked down at Kyle. The rage was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He wasn't looking at me with hatred anymore. He was looking at me like I was a monster. Finally, I turned to Leo. He was standing exactly where I'd last seen him, his precious sketchbook clutched to his chest, His eyes were wide, darting from me to the gasping bully on the ground and back again. He looked terrified, but not of them. He was looking at me with a fear I had never seen before. "Maya," he whispered, and his voice was small and shaky. It was the voice he used when he had a nightmare. I took a step toward him, my hands open, trying to soften my posture. "Leo, are you okay? Did they hurt you?" He flinched. He actually flinched back, taking a half step away from me. That small movement hit me harder than any punch Kyle could have ever thrown. In his eyes, I wasn't his protective older sister anymore. I was something else, something violent, something scary. The same force that had defended him had now created a chasm between us. My heart sank. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be his hero, his protector. But looking at his pale, frightened face, I felt like the villain. I bent down and picked up the discarded brass knuckles, the metal cold and heavy in my palm. I stared at them for a long moment before my gaze shifted past my brother, back toward the main road. The lanky kid was gone, and Beanie Kid was now limping away as fast as he could. But Kyle was just now pushing himself up onto his elbows, his face a mess of dirt and confusion. His eyes found mine, and the fear was quickly being replaced by something else, something cold and calculating. Then I heard it. A faint, distant siren. It grew steadily louder, closer. Someone must have seen the commotion, or maybe one of the kids had a phone and called the police as they ran. My blood ran cold for a completely different reason. I was standing over a boy I had just physically assaulted, holding a weapon. The situation looked bad. Terribly, horribly bad. I looked at Leo, whose eyes were now wide with panic as he heard the sirens too. Then I looked at Kyle on the ground. A slow, malicious smile began to spread across his bruised face. He knew exactly what this looked like. He knew what was coming. "You're in for it now," he rasped, his voice filled with a triumphant, vengeful glee. "Wait till they hear how you and your little brother jumped me." The wail of the sirens grew from a distant cry to an imminent scream. My mind, usually a calm sea of strategy, was a chaotic storm. Kyle's smug, triumphant face was the lightning illuminating the wreckage. He had me. He was going to twist this, turn my defense of my brother into a vicious, unprovoked attack. The image was perfect for him. I was the one left standing. The weapon was in my hand, and he was the victim on the ground. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt on the road, doors flying open. A burly male officer and a sharp-eyed female officer approached cautiously, their hands near their holsters. "Nobody move," the male officer commanded, his voice a stern bark that echoed off the trees. My training kicked in. Sudden movements were the enemy. I slowly unclenched my fingers, letting the brass knuckles fall to the dirt with a soft thud. I raised my hands slowly to shoulder height, palms open, showing I was unarmed and not a threat. "It's not what it looks like," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic hammering of my heart. "It looks like you just committed assault, young lady," the female officer said, her gaze sweeping over the scene, a terrified Leo clutching his book, and Kyle, who was now putting on a masterclass performance, groaning and clutching his head. "She attacked me," Kyle cried out, his voice cracking with feigned pain and fear. "Me and my friends were just walking home, and she and her brother jumped us. She had those things." He pointed a trembling finger at the brass knuckles. "And she just went crazy." The male officer was already moving toward Kyle to help him up, while the female officer kept her eyes locked on me. "Is that true?" she asked, her tone professional, but laced with heavy skepticism. "No," I said firmly. "He and his friends had my brother backed against that fence. They were tearing up his sketchbook and they shoved me. He pulled out the weapon, not me. I was defending myself and my brother. It's my word against his, I know," I continued, seeing the doubt in her eyes. "He was bullying my brother. That sketchbook he's holding? Ask him to show you the page Kyle tore." The officer glanced at Leo, who looked like he might faint. He clutched the book tighter. "Son, can I see the book?" she asked, her voice softening slightly. Leo, trembling, could only shake his head, too scared to speak. My heart sank. He was shutting down. All the proof I had was in his hands, and he was too terrified to show it. Kyle's smirk returned, wider than ever. He thought he had won. But then something shifted in my brother. I saw him take a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at my face, at the desperation I was trying so hard to hide. He looked at Kyle's sneering expression. And then he looked down at the sketchbook in his arms. But it wasn't the leather-bound one he opened. From under it he pulled out a smaller, spiral-bound notepad, his everyday sketchpad, the one he always had with him. "He's lying," Leo said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the tension. He stepped forward, away from the fence, and held the notepad out to the female officer. "They were waiting for me. I was drawing the trees when they showed up." The officer took the pad, a confused look on her face. She flipped it open. On the page, rendered in stunningly realistic detail, were 3 figures. Kyle was in the center, a cruel smirk on his face, his posture arrogant. His 2 friends flanked him, but it was the detail that made everyone freeze. With just a few deft pencil lines, Leo had perfectly captured the heavy, angular shape of something in Kyle's right front jeans pocket. It was an unmistakable outline, the outline of the brass knuckles. At the top of the page, in Leo's neat small print, was the date and the time 10 minutes before the police were called. The officer's eyes widened. She looked from the drawing to Kyle, whose face had gone from smug to sheet white. She flipped the page. The next drawing was a quick, frantic action sketch, a blur of motion showing a larger figure swinging and a smaller one moving inside the punch. It was a perfect silent testimony. "So these were in your pocket before any of this started?" the officer asked Kyle, her voice now cold as ice. She picked up the brass knuckles with a pen, holding them up. Kyle started to stammer. "No, she must have... He drew that after." "This is graphite, kid," the officer said, gesturing to the drawing. "I can see the pressure marks, the different layers. This wasn't drawn in 5 seconds. This was done by someone sitting here, observing. Your friend with the beanie." She pointed to the drawing. "Where is he?" Kyle was silent. His lie had crumbled to dust under the weight of a few pencil strokes. My quiet, artistic little brother, the one I had always felt the need to protect, had just saved me with the one weapon he had ever learned to master, his pencil. The aftermath was a blur of statements and parental phone calls. Kyle's parents arrived, their faces a mixture of fury and embarrassment when the brass knuckles were presented alongside Leo's drawings. The truth, in all its ugly detail, came out. The threat of pressing charges was enough to ensure we would never, ever see Kyle or his friends again. As the last police car pulled away, leaving the woods in a sudden, peaceful silence, Leo and I just stood there for a moment. He finally looked up at me, the fear gone from his eyes, replaced with a deep, quiet understanding. "I wasn't scared of you, Maya," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I was scared for you. When he pulled that thing out, I thought..." He didn't have to finish. I knelt down in front of him, my eyes level with his. "I know," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "And I was scared too. But we protect each other. That's what we do." I gestured from my fists to his sketchbook, "With whatever we've got." A small smile finally returned to his face. He opened his damaged leather sketchbook and looked at the page Kyle had torn, the knight in shining armor. The tear went right through the knight's shield. Leo looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. "It's okay," he said, a new confidence in his voice. "A shield can be damaged and still work. Sometimes the cracks are what show you it did its job." I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his hair, overwhelmed with love and relief. We walked home together, side by side. I was the steel, and he was the art. They thought they could break us apart, but they had only proven how much stronger we were together.